The standard hung over the bar, before him. Best of luck, Alice. The party was excessive. A representation of Alice's inclination to overcompensate. The presence of her brand new, fairly amazing life partner, who was hauling her away to some unheard of town in the Midwest, was the clincher. Raymond couldn't stand cherries. Over the music, over the clunking of the glasses, over the brain desensitizing casual discussion of others, he paid attention to her chuckle from her table behind him. Her voice was particular and natural. A main tune played behind the scenes of a film. His ears tossed it and her to the front of his psyche, as though he wanted assistance doing as such. 12 years of cooperating years that persuaded him they were perfect partners, and one day she nonchalantly makes reference to she's leaving, as though discussing the climate. It wasn't sufficient. All he'd shown her in their 12 years. Adjusting her perspective wasn't sufficient. Here you go. The barkeep set a glass of scotch close to him prior to removing an unfilled glass. One more glass actually stayed in Raymond's grasp. He tipped it, gazing at the 3 dark lines that ran from the knuckles of his right hand, down past his dark suit sleeve. It was worth the effort, he reminded himself. Bearing the imprint was multiple times over worth his freshly discovered prize. Moreover, he'd be freed of them soon enough. Once more he completed what minimal scotch was in the ongoing glass, taking the enhanced one preceding, hearing her voice. This time, it was nearer. Raymond, she called, her tone warm and certifiable. He went to her. Her white, tube dress gripped beneath her dull, wavy hair. Underneath the blue lights, the white bits that moved across her from the impression of the mirror ball above, she looked strange. A heavenly messenger found on the sea depths. She stunned, not from liquor, nor the impact points on her feet. It was without a doubt from the dark lines running down his right cheek. Goodness, she stammered prior to recuperating, however presently overcompensating for it. You made it. His grin, in the wake of seeing her response, diminished altogether. It sat underneath his eyes and ready as though it could jump without warning. Wouldn't miss it. Apologies, it's simply she waved at her own cheek. Is that a tattoo, or is that from the accident? Raymond let one shoulder shrug. Around 50% of his grin blurred while his left hand naturally felt his left front pocket. A touch of both. She ventured forward, continuing her underlying endeavor to embrace him. All things considered, you look perfect. He embraced her with his right arm, cautious not to squeeze his left side against her. All things considered, he enjoyed her touch. His hand folded over her, gripping the contrary side of her midriff. I don't maintain that you should go. You're sweet. She broke the embrace, as though an idea had seemed obvious her. You want to meet him? No, he squinted. Notwithstanding his automatic idea, Raymond gestured and held up a finger. Have to raise a ruckus around town first. I'll think that you are returning? Bargain. She crushed his arm, grinned, and dismissed. Before the accident, Raymond would have believed the men's space to hush up. Now that he knew genuine quiet, he favored this monstrously. White tiles bobbed each slight sound his suit made, as he remained in obscurity. Blue slow down. He dove into his left front pocket and took out a little, glass ball, which fit perfectly in his palm. He set it against his right cheek and ran it along the dark lines. The glass ball was put on the tile floor. What's more, regardless of its shape, it didn't roll away. It stayed still briefly, before it started to shake. The shaking went to vicious wobbling before an enormous bulge came from the sphere. The structure took the state of a hand that squirmed and extended towards the roof. The glass became wide and tall, almost to Raymond's eye level, before it contracted, snapping into a lady's figure. She sparkled, briefly, before the sparkle dulled. The opaquity immediately blurred into paper white skin. She remained before him, stripped and skinny. Fire-red hair covered her face before her hard fingers separated them. Raymond staggered in reverse at seeing the tissue-covered attachments underneath her temple. She sneered at his response. As though to facilitate his feelings of dread, she pawed her fingers into the attachments, eliminating abundance tissue, and uncovering the greenest eyes Raymond had at any point seen. She utilized them to gaze at him, to take him in, prior to lifting a hand to his right cheek. Her mouth opened, and a sound got away from her. Sand tumbled from her mouth, got away from her lungs, and poured onto the floor before her voice followed. The expert's imprint. Her grin enlarged. All who bear it are conceded 3 wishes, be they sublime or awful. She looked down at his clothing before her own hand contacted her brow. A flash tumbled from her fingers, and she was embellished with a green dress, which matched her eyes impeccably. Her red hair collapsed all alone, twisting itself into a flawless coif. As she grinned at him, he felt her fingers on his mind, rifling through it like a Rolodex. Furthermore, when she at last showed up at what she was searching for, she found it in a spot that wasn't dim or dangerous, nor salacious or desirous. She tracked down it in a position of adoration and forlornness. He felt bare as she grinned at him. She currently understood him better than anybody. A shudder went through him, however the newly discovered briskness didn't leave with it. "What? You're not kidding," she said, unequivocally. "I like you." "Simply don't," he stammered, unfit to track down words that fulfilled the needs of the relative multitude of inquiries to him. "Try not to hurt her." The red-headed lady contacted Raymond's plain cheek with a hand that was colder than a window on a colder time of year morning. "Name me, and afterward name her." Shaking, he gestured. At the table, Alice howled uncontrollably. Also, in her recuperation, she felt Christian's hand slide to the little of her back. It was a pleasant method, one that he pulled on their most memorable date, and it worked out well for him then as well. She gave him a knowing look, allowing him to pull her nearer. She contacted her cheek to his, believing his blonde stubble brush her. "In any case, no doubt," she demanded, her foreheads raised with expectation, "you're dropping by." "I will," one of her companions guaranteed, hurling her hand in a commitment. "I'm bouncing a plane the second the Jackson account closes." "Great." Alice tossed her hip and moped. "Since I will miss you." "Young lady, same," her companion pronounced. The grin she wore immediately blurred as something got her attention, to one side, something that cooled her. Alice parted from Christian's arm to turn. She saw Raymond inside a couple of feet of her, and on his arm, there draped a lady with the skin of a porcelain doll. Alice faked energy. "Hello."
Raymond's appearance relaxed to see her as he motioned. "Jen, this is Alice." "Alice, this is Jen." "Good gracious," Alice shouted. "I had no clue you were seeing somebody." "Hey." She immediately caught the pale lady's hand with both of hers. Freezing. The frigidity ran from her hands, into her bones, and dependent upon her eyes. Furthermore, through it, she saw recollections of a day-to-day existence that hadn't occurred at this point. She sat alongside Christian on the plane, enthusiastically crushing his hand as she squirmed in the little seat. Furthermore, as she laid her head on his shoulder, she felt the runway, and their previous lifestyles, abandon them. He conveyed her across the edge of their natural, new home. He battled with the ponderousness of the wedding dress, thumping over a side table all the while. He dropped her into the completely clear waves. She kicked and screeched momentarily, prior to pausing her breathing. She stood up all alone, moving her hair out of her eyes to see him. She brushed her hair from her face as she requested that the specialist rehash the same thing. She did. It was fruitless to affirm Alice. She focused on Christian, who was looking directly ahead. She connected and crushed his hand. He didn't press back. In obscurity, she opened the storage room and pulled the extra sheets and blanket from it. Red peered toward, however not drained. She hauled them down the means and laid them on the ground floor love seat. It wouldn't make any difference. The work, and her contemplations, kept her conscious until the end of the evening. She strolled past the kitchen table, his supper sitting alone upon it. It had developed cold 2 hours prior. She passed on it for him to find, however, she found him first at the entryway. His suit and hair were rumpled. Her life was in boxes, stuffed on a truck that didn't as of now have an objective. She'd went through the most recent 5 years abandoning everybody, and presently him also. She went to see him inclining in the entryway of their natural house. And, surprisingly, then, in spite of everything, she missed his hand on the little of her back. The music got back to her first, then the clamor of the party, then, at that point, the shapes and shadows of everyone around her. Alice stood, mouth agape, at last relinquishing Jen's virus hand after what felt like a lifetime. She pulled her hands back, missing-mindedly gazing at the floor as she attempted to handle what had simply occurred. Fingers touched her back, liberating her from the murkiness with an unexpected shock. She almost jumped away. She went to Christian as he withdrew his hand. Her eyes and lips prepared an outburst that didn't have the foggiest idea where to begin. A quiet would have followed, in the event that the 80s dance music hadn't explicitly taboo it. You okay? Indeed, she thought. She was over and above anyone's expectations, truth be told. She grinned, gave a speedy and unconvincing, "That's right. Simply need some air," got her satchel from the table, and darted before Christian could snatch her. She felt the cool night air hit her, as though her eyes required any more assistance watering, and strolled energetically to her vehicle. She sat in her driver's seat and allowed the tears to go back and forth, clutching the wheel as though the vehicle could begin without warning. The whales were not many and delicate, and they were met with outrage and vulnerability.